really short, sweet, simple tests to write. If they start getting, if you're finding that you're having to, write a lot of mocks and stub out a lot of things, then you might want to revisit your code and try to write it a little bit more modular. And unit tests, you can get almost instantaneous feedback. You can run them as part of your development build and get that feedback right away that, hey, this method is broken. I'm not going to get the thing back that I expect. And there's a really rich ecosystem of tools to use for unit testing. You have Jasmine, Mocha. We use Jasmine. You have Karma. You've got Tap or Tape. So you can test things in the browser, with like a headless, like a Phantom JS or, a Slimer JS. So you can get kind of that headless testing against the DOM, but it's not really designed to test the DOM or UI, right? And it's not designed for end-to-end testing at all. Unit testing is very specific to small snippets of code, but it's a good way to ensure your logic, right? Kind of moving up from unit testing being kind of the foundation, you have integration testing, right? It's more end-to-end testing. You can test more kind of your classes, or you can test widgets and full features that you have. So it's kind of, I like to think of it as, you write these unit tests and your unit tests end up kind of building up together to create somewhat integration tests, right? Integration tests are also really important because they help you build documentation, right? So you can be working on a feature and hand it off to another team member, and all they have to do is necessarily look at those integration tests and they can figure out what's going on. Integration tests can get kind of fall into a gray area, in my opinion, where you can still test some of the UI, but they're not really intended to test the UI, right? Because you can run your integration tests in like Phantom JS, which is headless WebKit, or Slimer JS, headless Gecko. So you kind of get this DOM abstraction, and you're able to test against certain like class names or ID attributes, or that certain HTML content is returned, but you don't actually get away to see how that's rendered in the browser. You can use things, there's like Casper JS, you can use things to grab screenshots, but you're limited to WebKit or Gecko, right? You can't necessarily test against like Microsoft Edge that I know of. And again, integration testing, you have this rich tool set. A lot of the same things that work for unit tests work for integration tests as well. But again, it's not designed for testing your UI. So to test the UI, you really need to test in a real browser. And I put real here in quotation marks because testing in the real browser is very time consuming, but you can spin up emulators and virtual machines to get that real browser experience, right? So web browsers are changing so rapidly that unit tests and integration tests can't ensure that your features are going to render exactly as the designers have designed that feature, right? So they're designed. Unit and integration tests are mostly for testing logic and making sure that your logic works correctly. But UI testing is this thing that's kind of somewhat always fallen by the wayside or been done, in an engineer's spare time, or if you have QA resources, right? But it's very important to test in the browser because it's what the end user is actually experiencing. So brings us to the functional testing, aka browser testing or UA testing, user acceptance testing, right? Testing against real browsers. In a way, you're able to cover some of that logic because you're able to go in and input text into an input field, submit a form, and you can see what that form actually returns. But more importantly, you're able to actually test the UI. You can test CSS, right? There's no other way to test CSS than browser testing. And this is what's going to help you catch those weird quirks in like the cool CSS3 stuff that's coming out, right? And it allows you to cover real test cases. Oftentimes integration tests, unit tests, it's just testing methods, testing logic, and you're stubbing something out, passing in a value, and expecting something in return. With functional testing, you're actually able to go and step through, like a sign-in flow and clicking on things in the browser. Problems with functional testing, though, it's extremely time-consuming, right? Traditional functional testing, you need to have dedicated QA resources, whether it's your time dedicated to doing QA, or you have a QA team or a QA engineer who can actually spend that time and do clicking through. There's also the access to browsers and operating systems, right? These things are changing so rapidly that you have to buy licenses. If you're a Mac user, you have to get a license for Windows to be able to run a VM, right? And the things, or if you need to test a mobile application or a mobile site, it's how do you get the latest version of that mobile that mobile platform without having the actual device in your hand, right? And then it's also can be difficult to replicate your tests across all these different browsers, because you might have to open up IE9 on Windows 7, click through, do your tests, and then you got to go open up IE9 on Windows 8, click through your test, and you got to kind of remember what exact pattern you're following, right? Same with filing and tracking those bugs. You have to manually be entering those bugs. So traditional functional testing is like the biggest pain in the ass, right? Yeah, performed by a QA team if you have one. Manual, very time consuming. Your test failures, if you catch a bug and you've already kicked off a deployment like a Jenkins build, it's going to deploy, you have to now manually go and stop that before your UI bug ends up out in the wild. And then there's also Selenium, right? Selenium is a very powerful tool, but you have to manage that. You can have VMs with different versions of IE. You have to manage those things. You have to upgrade them. You have to update them. You can have a device lab. You can have a ton of devices, but you have to manage that device lab. You have to acquire new devices to test on, and it's just a pain, right? So yeah, QA is not what I signed up for. I want to build features, and I want to write code that's going to be used for features and widgets. I don't want to be spending all my time just clicking around and looking for bugs and fixing bugs. And so let me just see here. So has anyone ever seen, this is just an arbitrary example, but so like a spreadsheet, right? Traditional UI testing. Let's see if I refresh that. So traditional UI testing, I worked for a pretty large, pretty well-known company that creates tax software a while back. We did our UI testing pretty much like this. We had a spreadsheet, and different people would be assigned, I have a Mac, I'd be assigned to test Chrome, Safari, Firefox on the Mac. Someone else would be developing on Windows, they're assigned to Windows. Someone else might have an Android phone, they're assigned to Android. And it's just not an efficient way to go about doing your UI testing, especially for something as important as the UI, right? So there has to be a better way to do this. This is automated functional testing, automating that UI testing, right? So with test automation, there's clearly some downsides. There's a learning curve. You have to invest some time to learn some new APIs, configure things. There's the setup. You have to install dependencies. You have to acquire virtual machines. There's a lack of tools. There's really not many things out there that can do automated UI testing for you. And really, like, you want to spend more time writing tests. You've already written unit tests. You've already written integration tests. Now you want to write more tests to test your UI. But I think the benefits far outweigh the negatives, right? It's automated. This is something you can kick off from your command line, and it'll just run. You can run your tests concurrently, so you don't have to sit there and test, IE9, and then when you're done testing IE9, test IE10, and then when you're done testing IE10, IE11. You can run 2, 3, 4 tests all at the same time and knock those out in 2 minutes, 3 minutes. It also logs exception errors and bugs. So you get that feedback that tells you exactly what failed, that maybe there's, whether it's a timeout or that a DOM element didn't exist when you thought that it should exist, right? And there's continuous integration. So you can integrate it with your Jenkins or your Travis CI so that when you have a UI test fail, it can kill that deployment and you don't have to worry about that bug ending up into the wild. What do we need for automated UI testing, right? We need APIs to be able to access the DOM, so web drivers. We need to be able to tunnel in so we can test a local server or a deployed server. Or if your application's behind SSL, be able to get behind there. We need concurrency. We want to be able to run multiple tests at once. We don't want to have to sit here and spin things up and wait for one test to finish before we can start another one. We need the ability to pick and choose what platforms, what environments we're going to test against. And we need that reporting back, right? So we can easily identify the bugs, the exceptions, create bug reports. And then most importantly, I mean, because this is automated, because you're not spending the time clicking around, you need screenshots and videos. You need to be able to see with your own eyes what the browser is actually rendering back. So again, there's very few options out there. Probably the go-to option, the most well-known, is Selenium, right? And this is like the granddaddy. Pretty much everything is based off of Selenium. All the tools that I'll talk about are based off of Selenium. It's a very, very rich tool, and I'd say it's probably, from my experience, the go-to tool for the experienced QA engineers that I know. But I'm not a QA engineer, and I'm assuming that probably the majority of you aren't QA engineers, and Selenium is a beast to tackle. Like the learning curve of it is pretty large, and it's just, you have to install Java dependencies, and there's just a lot of things you have to do to get Selenium, to get like a local Selenium grid up and running. It's great because you have a lot of languages to choose from. There's great documentation. There's an amazing community out there, but for me as a UI developer, I don't have time to invest in learning Selenium and writing all these Selenium tests. And then you're still, in most cases, running Selenium locally, and you have to acquire licenses for Microsoft, for Windows, or acquire licenses for Mac OS, and you have to manage VMs, things like that. So what we want to do is take it to the cloud, which is what's been happening. Over the past few years, we've been seeing more and more cloud providers of Selenium testing come online. Sauce Labs and Browser Stack are two of the most popular, I would say, and probably two of the most mature. And these things are great because they take all that Selenium configuration, that learning curve of Selenium, away. They handle all the VM management. They handle the licensing. You want to spin up a Windows virtual box, you can have a Windows virtual box in a matter of seconds going up with Browser Stack or Sauce Labs. You have a plethora of devices to choose from to test against. You can go in and test against like the oldest Android phone, like Android, I don't know, like 3.0 or something. You can test against these odd browsers that no one in America even uses, like Opera, right? So these cloud providers are really amazing. Some of the downsides, you have network latency. Obviously, they're in the cloud, you have to have network access. Whereas Selenium, if you're running it locally, you can run your tests and they can run relatively quickly. With these cloud providers, I was trying to run some tests earlier to get ready for the presentation, and the Wi-Fi, the guest Wi-Fi is not very fast, and I was having things time out because the network latency. It's kind of a catch-22, like it can really slow down your testing, but at the same time, it helps you build empathy for the user. You get to experience what it's like for that person, in the middle of Kansas using dial-up or something, interacting with your website. No. Another downside to them is there are VM limits. So, occasionally during really busy times, you may get locked out of, a certain box that you want to use because there's so many other people on that cloud provider using the boxes. But it's pretty rare. And then they're paid, right? So they're really cheap. Like our Sauce Labs account at Mobile System 7, it's $12 a month, you know, and minutes roll over. So, yeah, we have to pay for it, but it's extremely cheap, and it's well worth it, and it's way better than having to invest the time into managing our own Selenium grid, right? All right, so let's see a quick little example of test automation. Let's see if this works. So it's very, very arbitrary, but so from the command line, we can kick off our test. So I'm using a tool called Intern that I'm going to cover here in a minute. And so I kicked off the tests. Scroll on down, you can see in the background, so we can see here on our Sauce Labs dashboard that I've got 2 concurrent VMs running, I've got 1 tunnel active, and I've got 2 tests that are currently running. One is running on Windows 8 in IE10, one running Windows 8.1 in IE11. And let's just see. So the tests run. I can actually go in. You can go in and you can view that test running in real time. They give you access to like a live player. So we'll scroll down. I think this may have timed out last night when I was doing it. But you can view the test running. But so test run. So test success there. We can come back down. You have access to screenshots. In fact, I'll just show you guys. So here's our, I'll just show you this here. Here's our dashboard, right? For example, here's a test I just ran just a few earlier this morning trying to get ready. So this is one of the so you can see it brings up a video of the test. You get access to logs, metadata, all this different stuff. This is an actual test running, scripted test running. It goes into the web browser, types in our URL, and anyways, it's taking too long, so. So what we just saw was Sauce Labs dashboard, right? Sauce Labs is founded by the creator of Selenium, Jason Huggins. So it's got some pretty good clout. The guy who created this thing that is kind of the standard is the guy behind Sauce Labs. It gives you access to Selenium testing, JavaScript unit testing, so you can actually run your unit tests against different rendering engines and against different browsers to see if your logic breaks in a different rendering engine. You can do mobile testing, mobile app testing, so you can run against Appium as well, so you can test native applications against different versions of operating systems, of iOS and whatnot. It's got rich continuous integration with Jenkins. And then Sauce Connect allows you to tunnel in so you can test local servers. So you can test your local dev server as you're debugging something and trying to fix a bug. And it's affordable, and they've got great customer service. And they have free plans as well. Browser Stack is another one. I've used Browser Stack in the past. Browser Stack is great. I switched pretty much just because of pricing. Sauce Labs was a little bit cheaper, and they're pretty much on par with each other in terms of quality. So what I used to integrate with and create these automated tests, it's called the Intern. So Intern.io, it allows you to write your JavaScript tests in any style. You can write, TDD, asserts. You can write BDD, shoulds. You can run tests straight from your browser. You can run node tests. You can test against all the different browsers that whatever cloud provider you're integrating with supports, whether you're using a local Selenium grid or Sauce Labs. It's really easy to configure. Yeah, you can seamlessly integrate with those. You can integrate with continuous integration. And when using for your JavaScript unit tests or integration tests, it automatically gives you code coverage reports back. So you don't have to, configure another tool like Istanbul to get code coverage reports. Intern, it's baked right in. And it's from the Dojo team, so very active development, active team, great documentation around it. It's pretty sweet. Baked into Intern is a WebDriver API called Leadfoot. So Leadfoot's tagline, it drives browsers insanely fast. Basically, Leadfoot is that layer that gives you the ability to interact with the DOM on your virtual machines. An example of Leadfoot's so you have Leadfoot's API. It's if you're familiar and comfortable at all with jQuery, Leadfoot is pretty intuitive. You have click events that you can fire on things. You can you can delete your cookies. You can double tap. You can do drags, right? You can do swipes. You can do touch scrolls and taps. And an example of, let's pull up the code. So an example of some Leadfoot in action within the context of our, in the context of Intern is, let's say we want to, test logging in to something, right? You get to the URL and then you just find elements by their IDs. You can find elements by their CSS selectors. You can click in that element, you can type in that element, and then, timeout, and then you can do your assertions, right? So here's the actual test, the actual assertion, but everything that drove my VM is from Leadfoot up here. Let's get back to the slides. So Leadfoot is baked into Intern. You don't have to, include an extra module. You can use Leadfoot on its own. You can just install it with npm Leadfoot and then include it as a module if you're rolling your own tests. A real nice benefit of Leadfoot is it takes a lot of those Selenium web drivers. So Selenium has these different web drivers for IE, for Firefox, for Chrome. That gives you access to the DOM. Leadfoot has pretty much all that stuff rolled up into it, so you don't have to be manually installing and including different web drivers. You just use Leadfoot, and it works. So some of our workflow with doing these automated UI testing is we use Jasmine, like I said, for our unit tests and our integration tests, and we just use Jasmine as part of a grunt task. And so we're continuously watching for changes using grunt watch. Anytime we have a change, it rebuilds our UI code or the change code of the UI, and then it runs our Jasmine test. So we can get that instant feedback as we're building a feature. With Intern and with the functional tests, because they take some time, Intern costs money, you have an allotment of minutes each month. And because sometimes it can just be overkill if you're working on, let's say you're building a feature that's pretty low impact, or you're just changing, some small stuff to your application, and you don't want to have to sit there for like 5 minutes and let a UI test run. So we typically only run Intern as a final step prior to closing like a big story. If there's something that is a large feature, run Intern so we can test it against all the different versions of IE, Edge, and all these different web browsers, and in all these different web browsers, or prior to doing a release and doing a big deployment. So we currently don't have it integrated with our Jenkins CI. It's probably something we should explore some more. But we just kind of manually go through, run it, go through the screenshots that it outputs, and make sure, no tests fail and that screenshots that things are rendering correctly. So yeah, while automated tests free up your time, they still do take time to run, and cloud providers charge by the minute. So you kind of want to use them sparingly. I wouldn't say, don't run them on a daily basis because you'll end up spending a lot of time just sitting around twiddling your thumbs, waiting for them to finish running. So the intern config file, this is the kind of the guts of intern. So let me pull up that file. So I've got it as a gist here, and I'll share the link with you guys, but and let me pull my notes back up here. So the intern config file is really where all your configuration happens, right? It's a config file, and it's pretty straightforward. I would even say if you're not super savvy JavaScripter, if you're a designer, even you can probably get this thing up configured and be able to run it from your command line. So, some of the things to point out in the config file for intern is you can define your Selenium version. So if you leave this commented out, as I have it here, it just defaults to the default Selenium version that cloud provider uses. So whatever whatever Selenium version Sauce Labs is using, it'll just default to that. If you need to use a very specific version of Selenium to have access to, very specific WebDriver, you can configure that Selenium version. So these capabilities, you can pass in any Selenium options. So you kind of visit Selenium documentations, and you can pass in Selenium options. So like screen resolution, right? If you want to be testing a responsive site, you can be passing in different screen resolutions to test that responsiveness of the site. The big one is your environments, right? This is where kind of the magic and the time savings happens. You just go through and you say, these are the environments I want to test against, IE11, IE10, IE9. I want to test on Windows 8.1, Windows 8, Windows 7. You can pass in arrays. So, I could say I want to test in Firefox on Windows 8.1 and Firefox 39 on Windows 8, Firefox 39 on Windows 7. And essentially what this tells the intern to do is this has intern then tell your testing environment, Selenium or Sauce Labs or Browser Stack, to spin up those virtual boxes. So like here, we've got, 7? This would create 7 VMs for me, and it would test against those 7 VMs. If you only have 1, it only creates 1 VM. If you have 20, your tests are going to take a while to run because it's going to have to be spinning up and killing 20 VMs. The concurrency, so this is how many tests you want to run concurrently. The default is 2. You can jack it up if you have really good network connection. But typically the providers are going to limit how much concurrency you have. I believe Sauce Labs, the most you can run, at least with the plan, the $12 a month plan we have, the most we can run at one time, I want to say, is 4 tests at once. So as you pay for more, you can get more concurrent tests running. And then, so here's for using those cloud providers, Sauce Labs, Browser Stack. You define what kind of tunnel you want to use. So Sauce Labs has its own tunnel, Browser Stack has its own tunnel. You just pass in your username and your access key. You get those things. So I'm not going to show you that because I don't want you guys taking my access key, but they're pretty front and center on the dashboards of Sauce Labs and Browser Stack. You just pass those in. That's your credentials, so that to give intern access to that stuff. So loaders. So I mentioned intern is created and maintained by Dojo, by SitePen, who's the creators of Dojo, which is an AMD loader. So by default, it uses the Dojo loader, which personally I like. I like using CommonJS, like Browserify type of modules. But if you prefer using like Require.js as an AMD loader, you can specify what kind of loader you want there. You can also pass in, different loader options, the packages that you need. And then your reporters, so you can customize, you can roll your own custom reporter. You can pull, and use like a Jasmine reporter, whatever kind of HTML reporter you want. Console's the default, and console works for me. And then you have, so you can do non-functional suites. So these are integration tests that you can run, or you can pass in your functional suites, right? And this accepts a file name globs as well. So you can just, name them all .spec and do star.spec, and it'll run all your functional suites. Yeah, so I mean, that's more or less the configuration file. That's kind of the beef of Intern. So when you run Intern from the command line, this is what it reads, this file, and then it knows to go and, go out, connect to Sauce Labs, spin up those virtual machines. It knows, oh, here's where they have their specs. Let's run those specs. And then you have your reporter. It'll report back to you everything that you need right there. So when you run Intern, you can run it from the CI with npm, setting up like an npm script. You can run it with Grunt. Grunt is built in. If you just include it into your Grunt task runner as a task, you just grunt Intern and it'll run. With Gulp, you have to get a third-party Gulp module to run it. And yeah, so I would recommend checking out Intern, trying it yourself. GitHub, the Intern. There are tutorials, really straightforward, walks you through it, and you can just start kind of hacking around on it really well. And so, and I'll have resources back up is the last slide. So what's next? So, the goal here is you want to be able to build these really rich, using the latest technologies, latest CSS, latest JavaScript UIs that you can, but you want them to be stable. You want them to be cross-browser compatible, or you want them to fail gracefully, right? For people who aren't using the latest stuff, right? You want to be able to write testable code for your unit tests. If you have to mock out and stub out a bunch of stuff, your code's probably not super modular, and it's going to be harder to test. If you already have a huge code base and you find that and you don't have unit tests, you don't have integration tests, and you find that it's a real pain in the neck to go back and write those unit tests and integration tests, you can do functional tests as a way to at least kind of cover yourself somewhat, right? Because these functional tests, you can run your application and then just fire it up in a browser and write your assertions and say, when the user types into the login field and hits submit, it should take them to the login page, or it should display an error message. So, one thing is with the functional tests, you don't want to get too caught up in running it. You kind of need to find that balance between, how much functional test code do you write versus how much real feature code do you write. And a good balance, I think, is to do TDD, but write unit tests, right? Start at that base foundational level, write unit tests, then write integration tests, and then to cover yourself before your code's actually deployed out into the wild, write some pretty simple, pretty basic functional tests so you can check against these browsers. And, be paying attention to code coverage as well. Like, it doesn't make sense to have a ton of code coverage on things that are really low impact and then no code coverage on, some really important classes in your code. And most importantly, don't ship bugs. Oh yeah, and there's recorders. So recorders allow you, especially for those of you who are maybe more on the design side, allow you to be able to record interactions on your screen, and they generate the tests for you auto-magically, right? So you don't actually have to sit there and write out a spec and and learn the Leadfoot API and say, like, go find by CSS selector, input with type of this, and then type in this. You can just start up and to be candid here, I have not actually used either of these recorders yet. The Intern recorder is fairly new, like only maybe about a month out in the wild, I believe. but you can start up these recorders and then just go and click through your Chrome. They have Chrome plugins. Click through your website is the Chrome plugin, and then you stop the recorder, and it will generate that script for you. So that then you can configure your intern config file, point it to that spec that it just generated for you, and run that same series of events that you just did, natively on your machine in Chrome across all these different browsers that are provided through Sauce Labs or Browser Stack. So yeah, there's the intern recorder, obviously plays with intern. Nightmare is another one from the Segment.io team. And for those of you who are really into Node and JavaScript, Segment they're kind of a big deal, I guess. They do a lot of really cool open source stuff. So yeah, resources. So I do have a GitHub up. It's not really up to date right now. You can go on there and start it, and I'll push some stuff up after the talk. Some of the real concrete examples, code examples that you can use. But the big ones are the references, Sauce Labs documentation, and go on, create a Sauce Labs account or create a Browser Stack account. They have free accounts, so you get like 50 minutes a month worth of testing for free or something like that. And for like the first month, you can do automated testing for free. Check out the intern. The intern makes it extremely easy to do this stuff. One thing, and then the Leadfoot documentation, it's baked into intern, and then there's the Selenium documentation around the web drivers. So the Selenium web drivers are what give you access to that DOM, right? And so if you understand, sometimes you'll have to dip into the Selenium documentation to be able to do some more complex things. But that goes back to finding that balance around, how complex do you actually want to write your functional tests? You maybe want to be writing a little bit more complex integration tests and not so complex functional tests. And then there's compatibility tables, can I use, and the ES6 tables to help you during development, so that you're not, putting in some CSS3 styling that is only available in the latest version, only available in Microsoft Edge and not available in any of the other browsers. And yeah, there's my contact information. If you have any questions or anything, you can always tweet me. You can come talk to me as well. And let's see, I feel like there hasn't been enough. I haven't actually shown you guys enough, so I want to show you real quick just another test here. So we'll go to the Sauce Labs dashboard. All right. Oh, that's why those were my manual. So you have manual tests. So with Sauce Connect, you can manually run a tunnel, and you can go and fire up a manual test. And I can just.
Maybe full screen that, maybe zoom in.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't have my Sauce Connect running right now, but this is just kind of an idea. You can go in, and this is some of the offering that Sauce has, right? For manual testing, you choose your operating system and browser, and these are all available for automated testing through the intern as well, right? So, you can come in and shoot. You can go against Mountain Lion and Chrome 27, which who knows? That was probably like 2010 or something when people were using that. So you have manual tests. If we come back to our account, they're going through some styling stuff right now, Sauce Labs. So here we have automated tests. So this is my readout. It looks like some icons failed to load, but you can see it just tells you, errors. These were timeout. We had timeout errors over here on the side. Success, full test, failed test. Shows you, what we're testing against. Gives you all access to all that stuff. We'll come in and.
Can I ask questions? How we kind of in the wrap-up phase?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Is this testing against something in my company when I deploy my company and I put the URL like, I don't know, perfectserve.txt or something?
Yeah, you can test against a public URL, or you can test behind SSL as well. So, yeah. You can test on an IP. That's the Sauce Connect allows you to test on an internal.
But essentially, I'm putting it either in-house or web address or something like that.
Yeah.
That's what this is running against. Not hosting the code that's application.
Yeah. Well, you can test against both. You can test against a local server if you're running the code yourself locally. So you can test against that, your own local development server, or if you have like an internal server running, like a QA server, you can test against that. And then obviously you can test against a public website.
Tools are different. It's different browsing, all the different OSs, all the different versions.
Yep.
And it's all orchestrating the tests to your record, it seems.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So for instance, here's a test that I was running this morning. VM, Windows 8.1, IE 11. And I can go through to my screenshots. So I always like to just scroll to the bottom. I sent them some feedback a while ago that they need to improve this UI a little bit. So maybe if some of you designers sign up for Sauce Labs, you can really start hounding them because their UI could stand to be improved. But, this was a test that I was running just kind of for fun this morning. I'm going to minimize that again just so I can show you the actual code. So here's Sublime. So this little test that I was running, right? I'll just get rid of that. Make this bigger. So I just wanted to go, this was like a little develop Denver test, right? So and this is the intern spec, right? So we register our suite. If you're familiar with AMD, this stuff looks, should look familiar. We require some modules, so we require our intern object and then our assertion. So it uses chai, so this is where that using whatever style you want comes into play. You can use, asserts, you can use expects, you can use shoulds and woulds and whatever. But basically I register my suite, I name my test suite. So here's develop Denver, I name a test, let's go navigate. So I like to just store my URL in a local variable, right? So I come here. So this stuff, I go and I want to get and I want to navigate to my URL. And so this is, what that right there did was, let's come, so there's a lot of like extra weird setup stuff they end up going through, but it looks like is that it? Executed a bunch of stuff, posted, get URL, post URL. Let's see here. Tell you what, this is why I just scroll to the bottom and then go back. Here we go. So in my test, I say go and navigate to that URL. Here it's gone to the Develop Denver website. And then I go, okay, I set a timeout, so it'll kill the test if I hit my timeout. But then I go and I will say, okay, get the current URL, uses promises, so you don't have these crazy nested callbacks, which is nice. So I say get the URL, then once it's gotten the URL, I want to return that current URL, and then my assertion just says that my current URL should match the initial URL that I said I wanted it to navigate to, right? And so that was one test that I had, one assertion that I had to pass. And then I did one, I said, okay, I want to expand the menu, right? So go, and this is the lead foot, find the element by ID nav button, which is, I hate that when they hijack the scroll, okay. Which is, so this command here we got, find the element, clicks that element, so it expands that navigation button, right? And then says, okay, find by and I do a sleep just to make sure it gives time for that element to actually open and for things to become visible on the DOM. So the sleep kind of like pauses your test, right? because it's kind of running synchronously. So then I say, okay, find the CSS selector, and this is kind of jQuery-ish, CSS-ish, right? I want to go find that nav wrap element. I want to get the last list item and find the anchor tag, and I want to click that, and then get the current URL, and the current URL should actually match develop Denver sign in, right? So I go, finds that element, clicks that element, and it takes me to that page, and the test actually takes me to the development Denver sign in page, and then it does the assertion against the URL. So it gets the URL, posts it, and then delete is to kill the session. You have access to the Selenium logs as well. So if you're, a QA engineer and you're familiar with Selenium, this stuff is all probably familiar to you. If you like tailing logs and reading through to get more exception errors, this gives you that information. So.
I have a quick question about
Sure.
the sleep thing.
Yeah.
So if you're using like a static timeout on that, isn't it like increasing the amount of time it takes for your test to run?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
If it renders in 10 milliseconds, you've taken an extra second.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Is there no event-based way to do that?
I believe there is. You can execute. You can pass in like through Leadfoot. You can pass in a method called execute, and you can execute code. Extra JavaScript code that's not part of the Leadfoot API. There's also, if you look at the Leadfoot documentation, there's a lot of polling that you can do. So. So I think, what you're looking for is, so you have, there's like these waits, so you can like wait for deleted, and where is it? There is a poll built into Leadfoot, so you can poll until something becomes visible. So you can tell it to basically, just sit there and listen, and once some DOM element becomes visible, then with like a promise, then kick off another assertion or find another element. But yeah, I mean, I would recommend explore the Leadfoot documentation. It's really good documentation, and yeah, it's pretty similar to like jQuery kind of DOM manipulation stuff. So yeah, is there any other questions, or anyone want me to put any other slides back up or see anything else? Yeah, it's it's pretty cool stuff, I think. I know that, we end up spending a lot of time clicking around on things, and just randomly clicking through and getting emails from a QA person saying, hey, this is broken and, whatever. And this is a nice way to streamline it. Yeah.
Can you drive a browser locally?
Yeah. Yeah. So the intern tutorial, that's actually how it starts. If you go to the intern, they have that intern tutorial, and it allows you to drive the browser locally. So you can write your own local tests for Firefox, for Chrome, for Safari, IE, whatever. So there's other things out there like this too. Like Intern, there's another one called Night Watch. It's out there, browser automated testing. But with the Intern, so I'll just give you, here's Intern's website. So they have the comparison chart. The really nice thing about Intern is that you can run functional tests, you can run unit tests, you can run your integration tests all within Intern. So like for us, we started using Intern and writing functional tests after our code base was about 2 years old, and after we already had like 3,000 Jasmine specs. So for us, it's like we have these two different test suites. We've been talking about whether it's worth it to invest the time to try to merge all our Jasmine stuff into the Intern, and then we're only using one test suite. I would say if I could go back in time, and then we would have probably gone just with the Intern. But it wasn't around 2 years ago. It's relatively new, so. Yeah.
So the ability to take screenshots along the way of the testing, is there a way to compare the
Yeah, there's not built into, it's not built into the intern, but yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There's this thing from Huddle called Resemble.js, and this is pretty cool. It's a visual diff tool. So we'll go to their demo so you can, well, actually, I don't have an image handy, but yeah, this is pretty cool. It's a visual diff tool. I know some of the team, after I left into it, they used it and they kind of had mixed feelings about the usefulness of it. So, yeah, you can go through, you can grab your screenshots of, your previous build, and then you can run intern on your new build, right? Grab screenshots and then use something like Resemble to do a visual diff of those screenshots and see where things may have changed. Problem is, it's not the most accurate. It's kind of like pixel density dependent. So, if you're running them on like Sauce Labs on a Windows VM, you might get it might tell you that there's things that have changed that haven't really changed just because like pixels are off because you're diffing an image from, your local machine against something on like a VM, right? So yeah, Resemble.js from this team Huddle. So, yeah, I was gonna try to work that in a slide into that, but life, man. So cool. Well, yeah, I guess that's time. So thank you guys.